Hi everyone, this is Dr. Momsilovich with your Lecture 15 on Behavioral Ecology. This lecture is special not only because it's your last lecture for the semester, but it's also special to me personally because I am a behavioral ecologist. I got my PhD in behavioral ecology, and so this lecture is very near and dear to my heart. So let's start first by talking about a few important behavioral ecologists or a few important biologists who've studied behavior in animals. These three scientists are very famous in the field because they are the first and only biologists to win Nobel Prizes for their work in physiology and medicine, and they won this in 1973 for their work individually on animal behavior. So the first scientist we're going to talk more about is Nico Tinbergen. So Tinbergen's 4 questions are an important part of behavioral ecology, and we're actually going to talk more in detail about those. In addition to those, Nico Tinbergen came up with fixed action patterns, which are essentially an idea that there are certain actions that once they've been triggered, they have to go through to completion. So a good example of this is if you were to put your finger on a newborn baby's hand, the baby will grasp your finger just out of a natural innate response. And that's an example of a fixed action pattern. The next scientist is Konrad Lorenz. He is known for his work in ethology, which is essentially looking at animal behavior in a natural setting and looking at that behavior as an adaptive characteristic that has been shaped by evolution. He's also known for his work on imprinting behavior. So in the picture, you can see Lorenz being followed by 3 baby geese. And he did work where he showed that the offspring of some species, like birds and some mammals, imprint on their parents, and they do this right after birth so that they know who to follow around and when to do that. And so that's an important behavior for those animals for their safety and to stay near their mother. He also is known for his work with Umwelt, which is the idea that the world is different in how it's experienced by any organism. So the way that you experience the world is different from the way that another species experiences the world. The last scientist is Carl von Frisch, and he's known for his work on honeybees. So he did research that showed that bees have a dance language, and they, even in the dark, can do a special dance that tells their nest mates the direction and distance to food sources. He also is known for his work on optical perceptions of honeybees, which essentially lets them know where they are in their environment and how to move through it. So Nico Tinbergen's 4 questions are very important and actually a very powerful set of questions because they were developed by studying animal behavior, but they can actually be applied to anything that you are doing research on. So his 4 questions are: how does it work? How did it develop? What is it for? And how did it evolve? And those 4 questions are broken into 2 main categories, which are that they are proximate and ultimate. A proximate question is something that is looking at the mechanisms, and an ultimate question is looking at the evolution of that mechanism. So the proximate questions are the how, and the ultimate questions are the why. So if we're looking at anything that you can think of that we can study, we can ask these questions about. So we can ask the question of how do birds fly? what allows them to migrate to the same places during the different seasons. You could ask questions about vaccines and how they're effective and why they're effective and things like that. And so these questions are really, really useful and really important. So for approximate question of how does it work, if we're talking about vaccines, it's looking at the physiology and the chemistry of that vaccine and asking, how does it work? What does it affect within your body? And how are you getting a resistance to a disease because of it? What are the mechanisms behind it? Historical, how did it develop? So sort of what's the history, what's the science behind it, things like that. An ultimate question is, what is it for? What is the evolutionary context of it? Where did this disease come from? How did it evolve? How is it affecting human evolution? How is it going to affect human evolution in the future? And how did it evolve would be the last question. So again, it's the how, which are the proximate questions, and the why. So the pictures on this slide are showing bees. Honeybees are specific species of bees that make honey. Not all bees do that. And within that, there are bumblebees. And bumblebees don't have typical beehives the way that we think of them with honeycombs and things like that. They have these little essentially pots that they make, and they fill some of the pots with pollen and some with honey and some with offspring. And so when we're looking at bee behavior and building these nests, we can ask these 4 questions about those beehives. So we can say, how does this work? How do the bees build these pots? How do they decide what goes in each pot? How do they decide how many of each different type there are? How do they decide who's doing the work and things like that? Historical, how did it develop? How long have the bees been doing this for? What properties within the bees do they need to have? What chemicals do they need to have to be able to build these things? What tools? What resources? Ultimate question, so what is it for? What caused the evolution of this behavior? Why is it beneficial? Why has it persisted? And how did it evolve? Do other bees have similar behaviors? Did this evolve one time? Has it evolved multiple times? Those questions can be very powerful because they not only allow you to ask questions about whatever you're studying, but they also allow you to ask additional questions where you can then form more hypotheses and do more tests and dive deeper into your study system. So these are really important and powerful questions in any type of research. So behavioral ecology is essentially looking at the evolution of behaviors that maximize fitness of an individual. So when we're talking about fitness in biology, we're not talking about how much weight can you lift at the gym. Fitness is actually the ability of an individual to survive and reproduce. And your fitness is related to the number of offspring that you have that are then able to go on and reproduce themselves. So your fitness is how much of your DNA gets into the next generation. So behavioral ecologists will study one aspect of fitness or the other. So they'll either study survival or reproduction. And survival is not just surviving. There's actually a lot of different things that go into making sure that an individual survives. So you have to avoid being eaten. You have to either be able to camouflage yourself or be able to evade predators in some other way. You have to be able to avoid being diseased or parasitized. You have to know your environment and the risks. You also have to be able to acquire the correct nutrition at the appropriate time intervals to ensure your survival. The other aspect of fitness is reproduction. And when we're looking at reproduction, it's not just you have to be able to reproduce. So sexual selection is a special kind of natural selection where you're selecting for sexual traits instead of survival and adaptive traits. So this comes down to the idea that some individuals are better at reproducing than others. And if that advantage has a genetic component, it's going to be passed on, and over time, the population will have more individuals that express that advantage. And so you end up with the ability of the population to choose mates, to compete for mates, and to look after offspring. So if you have an individual who has a fitness where they have two offspring, and then those two offspring each have two offspring, so they end up with 4 grandchildren, their fitness is lower than an individual who had 4 offspring, and each of them had 4 offspring. So now they have 16 grandchildren. And so if that fitness is higher in the individual with higher fitness, if that difference is based on a genetic difference, then they can pass that trait on and then therefore have more offspring in the future generations. Let's look at some examples of sexual selection in wild animals. So let's first look at mate competition. So this would be where males are going to fight for access to females. So we're going to look at an example of elephant seals, and there's actually a link if you go back to the slides for you to go and watch a video on these guys. So male elephant seals are actually really, really aggressive, and one male elephant seal will win by fighting with other males for access to a group of females called a harem. And the male who's in charge of that harem and gets to mate with all the females is called the beach master. And so when you're the beach master, that male actually ends up getting 40% of all of the copulations with the females in that group. There's other secondary males who sort of sneak in and try to get copulations that way, but the male who's in charge of the group, the beach master, gets 40% of the copulations. And so it's actually very beneficial to be the male who is in charge of the harem of females. And so if you can think, or you can assume that if there's something genetically that is advantageous for that male who wins control of the harem, then that will get passed down when he's mating with 40% of these female elephant seals. And over time, you end up with males who are good at fighting for access to their females. The other type of mechanism where you can have reproduction happening is mate choice. So instead of the males fighting for access to females, you have males doing sort of displays or dances or building things to entice females to mate with them. So in this case, the females are choosing the male that they'd like to mate with. And so males will either have bright colors or songs or dances or build a nest that attracts the females. And so you've probably maybe seen some nature documentaries where you've seen some of these things happening. And most of these males have very exaggerated traits. So if you think about the bright color of a male, so if you look at this, the red colored bird on the right-hand side of your screen, that male is a flashy color. And so if there's any predators that are interested in eating him, he's a really easy target. And so you have to be a strong, fast male to be able to evade predators. And you also, in order to have enough pigment in your feathers to have those colors, you have to be really good at foraging and getting food. And so that bright color is an indication of the quality of the male. It says that I'm a really good, strong amazing male who can take care of myself, and I have good genetics, and that's why you should mate with me. And so when we're talking about mate choice, most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, the males are going to be the ones who are trying to woo the females and trying to get the females to mate with them, whereas the females are going to be the ones choosing. And this occurs because females are the sex that put more effort and more energy into reproduction. So females have to make eggs, which are quite a bit larger and take a lot more energy to produce than males. The females are going to go through gestation and then are probably going to provide more of the parental care than the males are. And so the sex that puts more effort into reproduction, which in most cases is females, are going to be choosy, and they should choose mates that are going to have good characteristics for their offspring. So in nature, there are actually quite a few different types of mating systems within animals. Animals can be monogamous, where you have one male and one female that are bonded together to raise their offspring. This can be for a season or for life, depending on the species. This happens most of the time in birds. So 80% or so of birds are monogamous, and that's because once the female lays the egg, both the male and the female are perfectly capable of finding food for the offspring. So they'll both stay around to help take care of the offspring. Polygamous systems are common in a lot of mammals. And so polyandry is where you have one female with multiple males, and polygyny is where you have one male with multiple females. You can also have promiscuous systems where all of the individuals just sort of mate with anyone, and there's no hierarchy and there's no pairing. The factors that cause the evolution of these systems are things like resource distribution and the distribution of males and females in space. So if there's just certain areas that are good for those animals to be located, you're more likely to have something that's a polygamous mating system where you have a group and one dominant male is in charge of the group with a few secondary and tertiary males below that. And then it also can be determined by if you're more likely to live in pairs, if you're more likely to be a solitary animal, or if you live in groups. Those different things can determine the type of mating system for that species. Parental care is an important part of animal behavior and sexual selection. So parental care is any behavior towards offspring that increases the chance of the offspring survival at the cost of the parent's ability to invest in other offspring. So this could be anything from making a nest or a burrow or defending a territory for your offspring, producing gametes, taking care of eggs, provisioning your offspring before hatching or birth, so making sure that they have resources stored in a burrow before they hatch or before they're born, providing resources for your offspring after they hatch or after they're born, and it can also be taking care of your young after nutritional independence, so after they're no longer using you, in the case of mammals, for milk, and you still maybe take care of them for a time after that, or providing social assistance to mature offspring, which is another option where families stay together and you provide some sort of social assistance to your offspring. There are different types of parental care. So there can be female care, which is exclusive maternal care. So in this case, we have a hippopotamus, and she is lactating because she's a mammal. And so she will feed her calf by herself and take care of that baby until it is independent and can leave. And she will do that without the help of a male. There is male care, which is exclusive paternal care. So in this case, we have a picture of a box dove, which is a male, the male of the species, and it's taking care of its two offspring. And you can have biparental care, which is where you have both parents taking care of the offspring simultaneously. So this is a frog that is biparental, and the male and the female will take turns moving their tadpole from one body of water to another to make sure that it has access to water and food. You can get fitness not only through your own offspring, but you can also get offspring by your close relatives having offspring. So your direct fitness comes from the fitness that you get from your own offspring. Indirect fitness is the fitness that you get from the offspring of close relatives. So as an example, I've put a little family tree for myself. So my parents have myself and my two sisters. I have one daughter. My one sister has no children. The other sister has 4. So my direct fitness is 0.5. So my daughter, or let's back up. So my daughter has 50% of my genes. She has 50% of my DNA and 50% of my husband's. So my direct fitness is 0.5. So that's the genes that I've passed on to her times 1 offspring. So it's 0.5. My indirect fitness that I get from my sister comes from the fact that I am 50% related to my sister. So we share half of our DNA because we each got half of our DNA from both of our parents. And so I'm 50% related to her. And so I'm 25% related to each of her children. She has 4 children. You can get fitness not only through your own reproduction, but through the reproduction of close individuals who you share your DNA with. So direct fitness is the increase in your fitness from your own offspring. Indirect fitness is the increase in fitness from offspring of close relatives. So for an example, I've provided a little family tree for my family. So my parents have 3 daughters. They have myself and my 2 sisters. I have 1 daughter. And so I am 50% related to her because I've given 50% of my DNA to my daughter, and my husband gave 50% of his DNA. So we're each 50% related to her. So I get 0.5 fitness from my child. My one sister has 4 children. The other one has 0 children. I'm 50% related to my sister, so we each got half of our parents' DNA, and so hypothetically, we got about half of the DNA from each of our parents that overlaps. So I'm 50% related to each of my sisters, and therefore my sister who has children, I'm 25%. When we're talking about fitness, you can get fitness from your own offspring, but also from the offspring. You can get fitness not only through your own reproduction, but through the reproduction of close individuals who are related to you and share your DNA. So your direct fitness is an increase in your fitness from your own offspring, and your indirect fitness is the increase in fitness from the offspring of close relatives. So as an example, I've provided a little family tree here for my family. So my parents have me and my 2 sisters. I have 1 daughter, and my older sister has 4 children, and my younger sister has no children. So I get a 0.5 fitness increase from my daughter because she has 50% of my DNA. Half of my DNA went into making her. The other half of her DNA comes from her father. So 50% of me is in her. I also get indirect fitness through the sister who has had children. So I'm 50% related to my sister, and therefore I'm 25% related to each of her offspring. So 0.25 times 4 is 1. So my inclusive fitness which is my direct fitness plus my indirect fitness, is 1.5. So under the umbrella of natural selection, we have a couple of different types of selection. So we have sexual selection, which we've talked about. That's where you have differences in reproductive success due to mate choice or competition. You can also have kin selection, which is a form of selection where inclusive fitness increases as a result of increasing your indirect fitness. So you have differences in inclusive reproductive success due to behaviors that increase indirect fitness while decreasing your direct fitness. So as an example, I could increase my indirect fitness and therefore my inclusive fitness by helping my other sister have 4 children, because that would get me more of an increase in my indirect fitness than having one more offspring of my own. So I could invest my time and energy into helping one of my sisters raise their offspring, and that could actually be more beneficial to me than having another child of my own. We look at when you should perform that type of behavior by using Hamilton's rule. So W.D. Hamilton was a ecologist who came up with this idea, and it tells us when we should perform an altruistic behavior. So an altruistic behavior is a behavior that can be harmful or detrimental to your own fitness while helping someone else. So it's something that you do to the detriment of yourself to benefit somebody else. So this could be giving blood, it could be adopting a child, things like that. And Hamilton said that you're more likely to perform an altruistic behavior if you're more related to the individual that you are helping. So he came up with this equation, which is R times B must be greater than C. So R is the coefficient of relatedness, which is the measure of relatedness between two individuals. This would be how much of your DNA you share. So you would share most of your DNA with your parents and your siblings, and from there, other relatives, nieces and nephews and cousins and aunts and uncles and things like that. The B, excuse me, sorry guys, is the